Hi, and welcome back to the Astroimaging channel. Tonight's session is on Inside PixInsight with Warren Keller. But before we get into that session, I do want to show off our weekly image spotlight, which is Richard Flynn's Seagull Nebula. And I believe you can see it there. I'm just moving back. Yep. Richard Flynn's Seagull Nebula, which I believe is IC 2177. If I'm wrong about that, please correct me. But it's a great image, and Richard gave me just a couple things to say about it once I pull them up. The seagull is fairly low in the southern sky, so to get much detail, he had to shoot it over several nights. On February 25th, he shot the H-alpha data, ending up with 10 subs of 1,200 seconds. It was March 5th before he could get more data, and the moon was pretty bright, so he shot the S2 and ended up with the same 10 subs, 1,200 seconds. The next night, the moon was a little farther away, and he shot his O3, getting 11 of 1,200 seconds, 11 subs of 1,200 seconds. A few nights later, he got about 20 subs of 180 seconds each for RGB, and that was all shot unbinned with Astrodon 5nm filters and the Gen E RGB filters. On the STF using the William Optics Star 71, processed in PixInsight and Photoshop, Anna Morris's Hubble palette creation, Bob Frank's RGB star overlay method to paste in the RGB stars, and SGP plate solving in Elbrus for acquisition. He is just commenting that Astronomy's local plate solver made it easy to get the images lined up night to night. And I believe that's pretty much it. So it is a very nice image. I kind of saw this one as he was working on this because he posted on the Cloudy Nights forum, which of course is where you could probably find most of us if you ever have questions. But that's pretty much it for now. I see some viewers in the room already, so I want to remind all of you guys that if you have any questions for tonight, just type them right in. It's Q&A. I think it's pretty much the only box you guys see to type, but you type in your questions and we'll call them out to Warren as we go. And so for right now, I'm actually going to hand it right over to Warren. And Warren, if you're there, you're welcome to take it away.
I'm here. Hello, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. This is my first Google Hangout of any type. We're going to hit the screen share and see how we do. Adam, you'll let me know if she's working.
Yes, I will.
And you should see a very exciting black background and a white cursor.
That's exactly what I see right now.
Yeah, we're on.
I see black background with a white cursor.
You got me, Adam? All right, excellent. All right, let's get started. So, to waste a little time, I wanted to show... Go ahead. I wanted to show you my PI project folder. What's that?
You know, Warren, I hope you can hear me. I think you're lagging a little bit as you click, so just click and try and talk at different times. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, you let me know. So I've opened up my PI projects folder, and I wanted to call attention to these XOSM files. We're going to work tonight on NGC 2613 a little bit, and that's here. And so this little icon is basically a call out to the 2613 data folder itself. And as you can see there, that's 3 gigabytes of data in there. So we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of the PixInsight project concept, which I love, but be advised they are large, and that might be one of the drawbacks. But I really recommend working there. Now you can directly click on the XOSM icon, and that will actually open PixInsight with the project loaded. But for anybody not familiar, let's open PixInsight by itself. And providing that we have the project toolbar enabled, we could just scoot up here and say load project. I hope we're kind of in sync. And we'll navigate back to 2613. And this is going to take a little bit to load, so we can have a brief musical interlude or have a nice chat. But this is going to load everything that's incorporated into this project. As you can see down here in the process console, the masters are nested in here. That's a nice feature that I like. I can save my master files within a PixInsight project. I've also got a lot of other images coming up here, as you can see. And as we'll see in a minute, these are various masks and various versions of images that I've used along the way. So we'll just take a minute to let that load. While that's loading, I guess I might point out that for anybody not familiar, on our IP for AP, Image Processing for Astrophotography site, the Part 1, PixInsight Part 1 tutorials, in the table of contents, we've given away the first 5 chapters. We call them the primer chapters. And these are wonderful for just getting started in the mechanics of the program, how to navigate, how everything functions, basically. So just go to ip4ap.com, navigate to the PixInsight Part 1 tutorials, and you'll see those free movies there in the table of contents. So, again, hoping that we're kind of synced, here is my latest, NGC 2613 in Pixis. I was quite pleased with how it came out. This is the final version, and between us guys just talking, yeah, I did maybe a little bit of 5% tweaking in Photoshop. I still value Photoshop a lot for what it's really good for, and I have a good deal of comfort level in it. But as you can see, we have a really nice high-resolution image of an interesting galaxy taken from our SSRO Chile Observatory. So how did we get to this end result? Well, let me say that since I did a little bit of tweaking in Photoshop, I'm going to close this TIFF, and this is actually where I left PixInsight. So everything to this was done in PixInsight. And I've gotten also very comfortable and really enjoy the workflow. Probably 90% of my work now done here in PixInsight. If anything, there were some very minor tweaks. Well, how did we get from beginning linear data to this finished image? Well, one thing I love about the project, and what I'm going to do is open the History Explorer window, and I'm going to click this little stick box, and that'll keep that open for a minute so it won't retract away. And choosing the LRGB image view, we have got a running history of everything that was done to this particular image. Now, we don't live in a vacuum. We know that elite imagers for years used Adobe Photoshop, and so it's hard not to make comparisons, right? I mentioned the 3 GB size of this project. That's pretty sizable. Photoshop certainly handles file sizes much nicer, I think. Let's look what's behind the curtain, right? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Here's what my project consists of. I've got my master files nested. I've got some masks, luminance mask, range masks, star masks, just a galaxy mask, and then I've got some peripheral other types of things that I used during the process. Remember that you've got multiple workspaces down here in the tray, and you can, again, nest these things over. You can park your masters over on another workspace to get them out of your way. This is how I'm doing things at the moment, and that may not be how I'm doing it tomorrow or how I necessarily did it yesterday. oops, sorry. So let's back up to the very beginning, and we need to put a auto screen stretch on this because the data is linear. And doesn't that look gorgeous? So apparently we had a considerable green bias there. And Photoshop doesn't keep running history for us upon session to session. So it keeps a great running history that we're able to jump between while we're in a session. But once we save the image and return to it another time, that history is gone. Now, it could be argued that, yeah, but why do you really need that history? You've got all your layers, your adjustment layers, your masks, everything you can keep within a PSD, Photoshop document, or TIFF. And that's very powerful. And again, it handles file sizes very well. But for some reason, I really took to the PixInsight way because even though, again, the project is a sizable entity, I've got this running history that I can go back and forth. Let's say I don't like a point that I arrived at, I can click back to an earlier time, and because I'm able to then click on the processes themselves, I can resume work and kind of fix my butt if I don't like something. And as well as I understood Photoshop layers, my minimalist nature just always found it very nerve-wracking to work with very multiple layers. And so I tended to flatten as I went, to kind of make me feel more like an artist working a palette. So this just works for me. I like it very much. So going back to the beginning, we're going to click on history states, and we can see I did a couple of fast rotations, and I just like the orientation of this a little bit better. The first thing I did was dynamic background extraction. So I'm going to click on that. Rather than clicking on the history state, I clicked on the actual process itself. And what it does is it opens dynamic background extraction exactly the way I used it. At the settings, you can see the samples in the field. So let's talk a little bit about DBE, which along with ABE is called background modelization in PixInsight. And it's a very powerful way of getting rid of gradients, especially multiplicative ones like just nasty light gradients and such. It will help with vignetting. It will help if you're using it in lieu of flats. Of course, there's no real substitute for good flat fielding, but it's very powerful. There's a fair amount of variation in the way people use DBE. You'll notice here that there's a very minimal amount of sample points that I've actually put in. One thing you can do with the STF, either invoking the screen transfer function itself or simply holding down Control and clicking on the icon up here for the normal STF stretch, I can correct that imbalance that we were seeing there, that green. And what that's doing is it's reading image statistics, and it's aligning those channels as if they were correct. But in reality, with that green bias, it's flooding the image and giving us that bogus look to it. So I just went ahead and cleaned that up, and that's done with STF. Basically what I did with that control click is I unlinked the chain here, and I clicked the auto stretch button again to get a nice auto stretch. Notice I've got a rather few sample points. Now, some videos you've seen with just hundreds of sample points. I'm not a mathematician, guys. I'm very much a visual, art-oriented processor. Fortunately, I get enough of the technology and science to be able to explain it to others once I understand it. But as I understand things, these gradients are rather large-scale structures. And so you don't need a zillion sample points. In fact, it probably will confuse the algorithms by giving too many samples. So I tend to go in corners kind of around the edge. Galaxies, obviously, a field like this is going to be a lot easier than, let's say, a very nebulous field with lots of extended nebulosity, and it's really tougher then to find those neutral sky samples. And we explain this pretty nicely in the tutorials, what you would do in those more complicated situations. But here, just going in the field, and I kind of try to split my distance to center, and got a fair minimum really of sample points. And when I ran DBE, I'm going to close out of here because it's dynamic. But anybody that hasn't run DBE, let me show you real quickly then. I'll typically run them on individual images. Like here's our blue master, and here is our blue master's history, and I'll bring it here, and I'll open its dynamic background. Oops, sorry. I'll open its DBE up because I don't want to whack my history out too much. And when I okayed that, what it did was it generated a background sample. Now that looks awful, but as of 1.8.2, we now have this 24-bit lookup table. And by clicking on that up there, instead of that posterized look to the background model, you can see a much more natural version of it. And what we do is we generate these because we want to compare them with the images themselves and see, do they look legitimate? And in this case, it looks kind of like some classic vignetting with dark corners, and it looks like a natural large-scale gradient. Once I'm done with background modelization, I typically delete the background model, and then you have to put a new auto stretch on. So we'll just put this guy away, and we'll resume again with our LRGB, if I can find it. Where are you hiding? Okay. So we did our DBE here, and I got ready for background neutralization. And many of us probably know about the preview aggregator, and that's nice. So I wanted to get some background samples separate and apart from the galaxy. So I defined a couple of previews, and then I came up to scripts and utilities and preview aggregator. And what it did was it allowed me to combine these two into a single preview. And I used that for the background sample when I did background neutralization. Then it's time for color calibration. Very powerful. Frankly, I never went the route of G2V calibration. And you can do that. If you get a factor from Bob Frankie's Excalibrator, you can enter that right in here as manual white balance. But I like PixInsight's what they call their agnostic color calibration theory, if you will. They look at all the spectral classes of stars in the image and determine what color balance is. I like color calibration a lot. I think it's very powerful. And there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can use the structure detection method, which is using wavelets to isolate the small structures, i.e. stars, and determine color based on those spectral classes. Or you can actually use a galaxy itself as the white reference. Now, Vicente Perez of the P team, he's a professional image processor and more knowledgeable in astronomy than myself. And if you've been on the forum, he's got posted, and we also repost in our tutorial series, very specific descriptions of the type of galaxy that is good to use for a white reference. And basically what you're saying is, your typical face-on spiral galaxy, not too far away, is going to have a very wide spectral class from blue arms to golden cores to pink and red H2 knots, and so it's a nice white reference. What I'll do is, and this galaxy I just felt was too ruddy, too unusual, kind of devoid of really a large variation in color. So I wound up not using it as the white reference. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll try a galaxy that I think is going to fit the description, and I'll also try a color calibration with the structure detection method, and I'll add the two using pixel math to get a blend of the two. So after color calibration, and we got to this point, we get rid of a lot of that red bias there. And we used RGB working space, and I'm not sure why I did that. But I like to do some linear noise reduction, and I think it's a nice idea to do it early before you even stretch the image. So what I can see at this stage is I used multi-scale linear transform, which is kind of the replacement for the older Atru wavelet transform, and I used an L mask, the luminance mask, an inverse, see the tilde, an inverse of the luminance mask. So let's just reproduce that. So with Control M, I can select masks. I can also right-click to the context menu and select masks here. And with wonderful overkill, I can come up to the mask drop-down menu and select a mask from here. But I like the Control M keyboard shortcut. And again, I used the L mask, and I can select inverse of that right here, and okaying that. With Control K now, we can actually see the mask. And of course, you can do that as well up here to hide the mask, to invert the mask, to disable the mask but leave it in place, or to simply remove the mask. But what I did was multi-scale linear transform, and this is kind of a typical noise reduction scenario. As many of us know, most of the wavelet transforms can be used for either sharpening or noise reduction. And you can do that here by enabling noise reduction for each individual wavelet layer that you want to do noise reduction for. Or when you're running sharpening, you would deselect noise reduction and you would just increase bias of a particular wavelet layer to give it a little bit of a sharpening. You typically, although it's capable of doing both at the same time, as we point out, since masks are typically inverse for those, right? We don't want to sharpen the same stuff we want to smooth typically. It's not a good idea to run them both at the same time. But anyway, I did a little bit of multi-scale linear transform noise reduction at that stage. Now, I don't know how good I don't know what the compression is like and how much we could really see, but this would be after, and that would be before. So this was before noise reduction and after. So that gives it a nice hit for the big bad stuff in the background before we do any stretching. And for anybody that's not really been in PixInsight much, we define previews here. We don't have the luxury of the on-the-fly real-time preview that Photoshop has, but we get quite comfortable with Alt-N to define a new preview, and we can drag that out however we like. We can adjust them after the fact. We can click on a preview, change the zoom level. We can rename it. That's not spelled very well. Now we can clone previews. We can do this. Notice that view is different, but when I drag this tab over to here, I've now got the exact same view in the close-ups. And so that just makes it great to experiment different settings. And Harry talks about experimenting, and Juan talks about experimenting, and that's something I just really hated and almost resented when I started. But I've really come to love, very comfortable with experimenting and trying to get the absolute best settings I can get for my results as I go along. Very comfortable with it.
Warren,
So,
can I ask,
yes.
Warren, can you hear me? This is Alex. Can I ask
Yes.
for an interruption here? For those of you who are new to watching the Astroimaging channel, and for those of you who haven't been here before, the Astroimaging channel goes off basically in two streams. One of them is the hangout room where you can actually get into it. It's limited in the number of people that can get in, and there are a number of people asking questions about its performance and how it works and things like that. And we're going to put off all those questions until after Warren's finished, because we don't want to interrupt Warren any more than we need to. So we're going to put all those off till later, and then feel free to ask them. If you're watching on YouTube, you can ask in Q&A and you can ask in comments, I think. It's sometimes hard for us to answer them here, but we want to encourage anybody who has any questions to enter them under the Q&A parts or under the comments section, whichever one you have access to. We'll interrupt Warren every now and then when content questions do come up. One content question that has come up is this presentation mostly for people that already know PixInsight? And I think I'll let Warren answer that. My own answer would be, you go around the walls of Jericho 7 times, and finally you blow a horn and the walls of ignorance fall down. I don't think anybody knows everything there is to know about PixInsight or Photoshop or any one of the number of these programs. But if you're not familiar with PixInsight yet and you're wondering what all's going on, just enjoy the ride. You'll see it all eventually, and then you'll someday look back at this one and you go, oh yeah, I know what he was talking about now. So, but I'll let Warren answer that more. Have there been any other content questions over on the other side, Adam, from the comment areas?
No, actually, that was pretty much the only question, and the others are about how we work Google Plus, it seems. So we'll explain that later.
Okay, so we'll interrupt you now and then, Warren, when content questions come up and we find a convenient place, okay?
Right. Yeah, great. Okay, so yeah, Alex, you answered that well. So just in case that particular person hadn't come in early, here's a great way to learn PixInsight. These are free tutorials, 5 primer chapters at ip4ap.com, the PixInsight Part 1 series. Watch those 5 movies. Watch Harry Page's free movies at Harry's Astro Shed. And this will give you a start into the program, how to get navigating, how to get comfortable. But this Hangout is basically just me kind of walking everybody through the steps that I'm using today to get results that I really like. And so with no knowledge of PixInsight, sure, one would be completely lost. Okay? So remember that we're still linear. I'm going to hit F12 on my keyboard. Let's remember, these images are still linear. They have not been stretched. And I'm going to put Control A on again for the auto stretch. And that's one of the big beauties of PixInsight, is that the visualization is so good with this STF screen transfer function that we're able to see a very non-linear looking presentation of the image before it is actually permanently non-linearly stretched. What does that do for us? Well, it allows us to do these kinds of repairs really being able to see the data in its real way before we take it nonlinear. Used to be that I used to say, you got to break it to fix it. So in other words, with Photoshop's very powerful Russ Croman plugin, Gradient Exterminator, you essentially had to break that image. You had to take it nonlinear and do a fair amount of stretching and such before you could fix the gradients. Well, the beauty of this, again, is you've got this wonderful visualization, and you can repair gradients very early on in the process so that things don't exacerbate as they go down the line. So let's go over here to, histogram transformation. So I'm obviously, at this point, I was ready to take my chrominance RGB nonlinear. And what I'll do typically, and again, there's no one right way in any image processing, but what I like to do is I'll open histogram transformation. And by the way, I sort of not necessarily forgot, but let's address these icons over on the right side of my screen. Or maybe they're on the left side of your screen. No, I'm kidding. But these are wonderful. So these are all processes and scripts. And those are available in drop-down menus, from the process menu. And they're also available if you have the process Explorer open on the left-hand side. They're also available there. But what they do is when you click on them, they open with the last setting used. And when you close the program, they open with the default settings of the program. So what the icons do, and I know Alex, one of our moderators, really likes this, is what I've done is for myself and for my customers and for you, what I've done is I've kind of crafted an icon set. This is what I call my chronological icon set. I'm in my late 50s now, so I need reminders sometimes. I don't want to be going, what do I do next kind of thing, and that's what I call the sea of gray of all of these programs. That's very overwhelming. But if I can come in here and say, well, I'm going to put an auto stretch on, I'm going to crop out the black bands that where images didn't match up because of dithering or whatever. I'm going to cure gradients with the background modelization processes. I'm going to do a channel combination of my RGB into a RGB chrominance. I'm going to neutralize background, color calibrate. I may need masks by that point. So you get my idea. That's my chronological set. I also, by the way, come up here to my toolbar for icons. I've also got an alphabetical set. And what that does for me is after I've done those rather rote do this step, then do that step kind of a thing, now I'm more in my free-form art mode, and I want to just grab a tool that I think is going to work at a particular time. So rather than looking down the chronological, I'll just go over to the alphabetical list and pull one. So that's what that's about. So and by the way, the icon sets can be saved and recalled every time you open the program. They can also be saved within the project, so they open with the project. I'm going to put my chronologicals back in place, and I went down a little rabbit trail. But here's histogram transformation. Now, this is the main tool that we use to take images to the nonlinear stage. There are others. In fact, in process intensity transformations, and again, we detail all of these in the tutorials. You've got a lot of different alternatives here, but my go-to stretcher, if you will, is histogram transformation. And what I like to do is, with Control-click on the auto stretch here, this little radioactive button, I open the adjustments, and I'll play with my target background mostly until I get a really nice visualization, something that would be a real safe stretch. And what I do then is I'll select the view here of the RGB image that we're looking at, and you can see that very tight little spike of a histogram there. And using the new instance icon, from this auto stretch that I really like, I'll go ahead and drag this up here. And what you can see is that that curve has now been applied. And by disengaging the auto stretch, and when I apply this to the image itself, it will apply that absolute stretch to the image. So I don't want to do that again. I don't want to mess my history up while we're going through this step by step. But here's the histogram transformation. Now, there's a process called masked stretch. And I'm going to go down here and pull up an image called, I believe, hopefully, MS, masked stretch. And masked stretch is very interesting. If you follow the PI forum, when they introduced this, I think last year, they were all about masked stretch. They thought this was, the latest and greatest, next best, absolute way to stretch data. And the thing of it is, I love contrast. I'm all about color and I'm all about contrast. And that's exactly what masked stretch is not about. What masked stretch is great for, and notice this beautiful blue star here. And I'm starting to sound a little bit like Adam Block. Watch it. But this beautiful blue star, note the saturation levels that we have right down to the bright cores of these objects. So what I have found is that masked stretch, and by the way, what is masked stretch? It's a iterative, nonlinear stretch, which after each iteration changes the masking properties, an internal mask, to protect the bright areas of the image. So it does an initial lightly masked stretch, then as it moves on to its 100 or so iterative stretches, it starts to mask out the bright cores and protects them from getting stretched too much, protects your highlights, and gives you tremendous saturation in those areas. But notice it's very low contrast. Yes, you could then repair that fact, but you're kind of defeating your purpose. So what I've done is I do not use masked stretch for luminance typically. Again, I value contrast too much. But what I'll do is when I do get a nice masked stretch result like that, I will use pixel math and in this case I blended 68% of the histogram transformation result with 32% of the masked stretch. And what that got me was a blending of the two, which was, good enough contrast for chrominance, because again, when working in monochrome, my luminance is really going to drive my contrast, my sharpness, my brightness levels. But if I've got reasonable contrast in the chrominance, and that the colors are holding up and showing well, and I've got that nice saturation, I'm happy with that. So again, this is not something I do every time, but it's something that I do sometimes. Next step for the RGB was TGV denoise, total generalized variation denoise. That's about the latest and greatest algorithm for noise reduction. I typically don't like TGV denoise for linear. Sometimes it works well, and sometimes I default to what we saw before, something like the new wavelet, the multi-scale linear transform wavelet. But it works generally very well for nonlinear. And so let's zoom in again a little bit. And again, this time I use that inverted luminance mask again. And so that's the before, and that's the after. And that's the before, oops. Sorry, guys. That's the before, and cue your eye here. Can you see that? I wonder if you guys can see that. So let me open that real quick. So TGV denoise, like ACDNR, has a function of edge protection, where we're trying to balance the strength of the smoothing up here with the protection of detail that we don't want smoothed away. And so again, I'm going to experiment, and I do. And I run a bunch of different tests on previews like we saw, and I will determine what the best setting is. And so I think I got a really good result here with noise reduction. And the next thing I did was SCNR, which is a specialized little chrominance, selective chrominance noise reduction, and it can be used to get rid of biases, most typically like green. So I took a little bit of green out of the image. And it looks like we're ready to take this guy nonlinear as well. So we'll take the we'll take, oh, I'm sorry, guys. Oh, we're already nonlinear. I'm sorry. I've just done a little histogram transformation tweak that's too subtle to even see. And this is an interesting thing that you'll see documented on the forum. We document it in the tutorials. I'm still not sure how I feel about it. I tend to get a pretty even stretch between the luminance and the chrominance, but if you want your chrominance and luminance to just match up absolutely pretty much perfectly, what you do is you use RGB working space at a 1:1:1 red-green-blue ratio. You can also use, 0.333, 0.333, etc. And when it doesn't change the image visually at all, but you've kind of aligned the channels 1:1:1. And once you've done that, what you do is you extract the L component of the chrominance. Okay, so the lightness component, taken in the lab mode, the lightness component of the chrominance image, and then you use linear fit, and your reference image becomes your luminance image, which we've not looked at yet, but there's my luminance master. And then you apply that to the lightness component of the chrominance. So basically you're saying match the brightness values of this to the luminance. Once that's done, you use channel combination to reinsert the adjusted lightness channel. Here's lightness, no AB, no color, just the lightness channel in the lab mode, and I would just insert that back into the chrominance, and then I should have just a really good match with my luminance. And so we'll go one more step here, and we're ready for LRGB combination. So before we do that, why don't we slip back over to our luminance master, and there it is. And that's my view selector, but if I'm looking at the history, I've got to select the image itself again to see its history. So here's our initial state for luminance. You can see some nice nasty blooms there. I'm fortunate enough to be working with an NAGB camera for the first time with any frequency. And what we did was a dynamic crop of, again, those black bands where we had some pixel drift, where images didn't line up, where compositions were different. Here's what's really neat about dynamic crop, and I show this in the tutorials. The best way, I would say, to align images is to use one reference image, typically a luminance image as reference, and to align everything, L, R, G, B, H, A, etc., to it. Because every time we do an alignment registration run, we're introducing some distortions, some noise. So we really want to do that in one fell swoop. But unlike Photoshop, dynamic crop allows you to keep that accurate registration. So when I cropped this luminance image, or basically choosing the image that's going to suffer from the most cropping, what I can do again with that new instance icon is drag it to the desktop with those exact settings, and then I can use this in subsequent images to bam, 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 apply that precision crop to all of the 4 or 5 images, and they'll continue to be perfectly registered. So that's something that's really powerful, I think. So we cropped this guy. I also cheated a little bit and changed the I mirror reversed it. I just like the composition of this better. Now here's the biggie, deconvolution. How are we doing on time? I guess not too bad. You know, deconvolution is a multi-step process. It takes a little bit of work, but the results can really be pretty spectacular. And so let's see the before of deconvolution and the after. So it's a little bit subtle on this one, but I hope you can see. Let's define a preview and see if we can. Well, that'll be difficult, but pay attention to these little lanes here in the galaxy and the star tightening that's going on around it.
Hey, excuse me, Warren.
Yes.
Do you know anybody that wants to buy a used ME that's sitting around?
Is this Mike?
Yes.
We'll talk. You're gonna sound like you're. All right. So you're trying to throw me right off the track. All right. So decon is it's worth the trip. It's worth the effort, but it is a little bit of work. It begins with well, let's open decon first. So there's 3 tabs in deconvolution: parametric, which used to be called Gaussian PSF. There's motion blur PSF and external PSF. Motion blur is something different. It's nice to be able to get a little bit of oblong distortions out of stars, bad guiding, whatever it might be. The parametric or Gaussian PSF is kind of best guessing at a PSF, and you can get really good results by just messing with the standard deviation here. But if you want to do it right, you really want to use a generated synthetic PSF, and the way you do that is we begin with the dynamic PSF process. Now again, we detail this really well in the tutorials. I hope you guys have availed yourself of them or will consider it. I'll tell you about a special deal we're running for everybody here tonight later, remind me. But basically what you do is you come in the image and you click on stars, and there's a very distinct subset of stars that is recommended, again, by the math guys, by Juan, by Carlos Milovich, to some degree by Vicent, that I really can't keep up with, but I'm smart enough to know to trust those guys. Basically what you're doing is you're choosing a star, you're looking at its A value, its amplitude, and what they say is typically you want that to be in the 0.03 to 0.08 range. So if you're seeing values over 1s, if you're seeing values in 0.01 or 1.2, you might want to delete those, and you can do that down here. But take a whole bunch of them as you zero in on that recommended amplitude. Collect a bunch of them. Then what you start doing is looking at these R, theta, and MAD values. And you want those to be in the ballpark. Notice already we've got a 0.96 and a 0.1, which is quite a bit of disparity, even though they're pretty close in the R's and they're fairly close in the MADs. So like I say in the tutorials, don't drive yourself crazy, but try to find a subset of a PSF that's kind of a really good representation of the average star with the amplitude that's going to work best. And when you've when you've picked those stars, you would get rid of the ones you don't like, highlight the ones that you do like, and clicking this little camera icon down here actually generates this artificial PSF, and that's what gets used by deconvolution. And there's a couple of more steps. You don't want to deconvolve the backgrounds, do you? I mean, the nice thing about PixInsight's deconvolution is that it's regularized, which means it does have a noise-reducing component. So in addition to restoring sharpness and getting rid of blur, it actually does have a bit of a noise reducing element to it. But at the same time, you don't want to apply deconvolution globally to this noisy salt and pepper background noise. So you want to use a range mask, a luminance mask, and again, I could show you that. What I did was, at this stage, I put on a luminance mask, not inverted this time. And for some reason, this is not visualizing the way they're supposed to. But you can believe me. That's that's what I want. And you also need a star mask. And so what they tell you is that deconvolution, as we saw here, is going to do a really nice job on the average star. Oops. Deconvolving the average star. But it's going to wreak havoc on these brighter guys. So what they ask you to do is to also create local support de-ringing mask. So most of us know what ringing is all about, Gibbs effect, raccoon eyes, and what this does is, and let's call up that initial star mask so you can see that. There's the star mask. And so it really, let me unstick this for a second. It was really just the brightest of the bright stars. Can you see that? And that'll protect those guys. So with the range mask, luminance mask type mask in place to protect the background sky, with the star mask created to protect the brighter, bigger stars, we can then start testing deconvolution. And again, I'll typically start with 10 iterations, rather low global dark setting for de-ringing, and I'll work my way up and typically wind up in a range of 30 to 50 iterations. 100 iterations can do amazing things, but it typically is a little bit, at least for my data, overdone, a little too sharp. So again, generally in the 30 to 50 range. Going back here to our luminance master, I'm going to stick this back open again. And then what I did was I inversed the mask, protecting the good stuff, the high signal areas, and revealing the background. And I ran TGV denoise. And so let's take a look at that again. Hopefully you can get a feel for that. And again, a fair amount of experimentation, but that's the before and that's the after. And I think that's a really good result. We're not killing any subtle detail. Notice like this little subgalaxy, little guy in the background there. Nothing's getting clipped away, and we're not creating any artifacts, I don't think. It's a pretty good result. And with that done, reminding ourselves that this is linear, we did the histogram transformation on it, and well, apparently I ran a little bit more noise reduction on a different area. So there's the luminance master. And I'm just going to remove that mask and put this guy away, and we'll return back to our RGB. And here's the point of LRGB combination. Now I tried something really wild on this one. I pushed a little bit harder. I thought, you know, there's hardly any blooming in the chrominance, and the luminance, you know, has got that nasty bloom. So I spent a little bit of time and subtracted a couple of masks and refined it, and I created this blooming mask. And so as you can see, it's all white reveals and black conceals, and I applied it to the chrominance. And then upon, let's stick this a second on, upon LRGB combination, I kept most of my blooms out, so I was able to, you know, just have a little bit of clone work and such to fix the chrominance blooms, but there's no luminance blooms introduced. So there's our, let's see, there's our chrominance, looking pretty darn good, and here's our much nicer LRGB. So again, for Photoshop processors, it's typically luminance layering, right? L over RGB. And in PixInsight, it's putting the L together with the RGB, knowing that down the line we will always have access with all of the subsequent tools to just the lightness components, i.e. luminance, or the chrominance components, if that's what we want to do when we're saturating and stuff. And so they marry at this point. And you know, there was a time when Juan considered adding layers to PixInsight. Layers are wonderful. They're efficient. Again, they do a great job of handling file sizes. Love them. But with GIMP being freeware out there and working its way toward, you know, full stability at 32-bit, they just felt it wasn't something they could devote much time to, and so it's on the back burner at the very best. Next came HDR multi-scale transform. Very powerful and a wonderful way of quickly developing detail by compressing brighter areas and giving us some really beautiful detail. Looks like I used a star mask on that, and that's because HDR multi-scale transform is smart. I mean, it knows that it's going to go to the lightness channel, that it's going to apply an internal lightness mask so it won't affect darker areas. It's not going to mess the image up. It's going to target pretty much exactly what we're going for, these bright cores. But it does have one artifact in that it will damage brighter stars. It'll make them, I think maybe Harry referred to them as saucer or donut. It gives an unnatural stellar profile. So what I did there was I used a different star mask that I generated, of course, from the star mask process. And again, that takes a little bit of experimentation too, but I, you know, all the stars that I wanted. I think I had to do a little bit of clone work with the clone stamp because some of the very largest stars didn't get picked up in the selection. But with the star mask in place, just for safety, I probably could have used the original star mask with just the brighter stars. But for safety, I just went ahead and put the inverse of the star mask on to protect those stars, and we did the HDRMT. So one more time, before and after. Okay. Looks like I ran some noise reduction. Oops. Let's see. Where am I? Oh, I'm sorry. We wound up back on RGB. Oh, no, that's right. Give me a second here. HDR. There we go. Sorry, guys. Here we are. I changed the image identifier up here on the tab to LRGB now. And it looks like I used pixel math. Okay. So again, with Photoshop, when we make an adjustment, we simply have an adjustment layer, which is very elegant, very nice handling of file size. Kind of unfortunately is when we make a major change in PixInsight, what we're typically going to want to do is clone an image. In this case, I cloned the LRGB image, and I got this. I named it LHE, Local Histogram Equalization. Here's the before, and here's the after. And again, before and after. And try as I may, try as I might feel that that's still a little too aggressive for the look that I'm looking for. So rather than just being able to dial opacity in or out as I do in Photoshop, I had to resort to pixel math, and I wound up doing just a 50-50 addition of that version, that local histogram equalization, to the original LRGB. And when I did that, I got this result. So that's where we are at this point. Then I invoked Unsharp Mask. And even though Unsharp Mask was invented in the 1930s darkrooms, it's still a very effective way of sharpening details. And so let's see if we can see this. This is the before, and that's the after. And so I didn't want to overdo it. I didn't want to kind of get artifacty with some of that nice deconvolution sharpening. So I thought that was a reasonable result there. Then multi-scale linear transform. So again, this is kind of the replacement for true, and in a sense for multi-scale median. This is kind of the newest multi-purpose wavelet transform. And we talk a lot about wavelets and wavelet layers and planes in the tutorials, but basically one being the smallest structures and residual being the very largest structures, based on kind of, structure sizes. You're targeting individual wavelet planes, and what I'm doing here is I'm pushing the bias by very small amounts to get a little bit of sharpening. And this is kind of a recipe that I've worked up. When I click on my my icons, and let me say multi-scale, where is it? That's the noise reduction, and here's sharpening. So that's kind of my cookbook. I leave the first layer alone because that tends to just sharpen noise, and I can adjust these, and play with them. And as I find settings that I like better, that seem to work, most of the time, I might take this new instance icon and replace the old settings. It'll ask me, do I really want to replace it? And then when I'm done, I go ahead and I save set as whatever I want, or I can overwrite my old one. But what I did was I did a little bit of sharpening with the multi-scale. And so before, after, before, after, very subtle. That's me. I tend to work very incrementally. I wish I were a more relaxed processor. I tend to take things, very tense. I take very small increments, make sure I'm happy with things before I move on. I did a little bit of morphological transformation, apparently. So kind of did a very small star shrink. If you look right here at this star, I'm noticing before, after, before, after. There's a lot of stars in that field, so I kind of toned those down a little bit. I did something with curves and a range mask. So you can increase saturation globally with the curves transformation process. And you can do it either with the S channel, which is saturation, that purple line, or I've also been fooling around with the combined AB lab components of color in the C channel, and I seem to get almost identical, if not identical, results whether I use the saturation or the C channel of lab. And that would be a global saturation, which we'll see now. And you can see in the blue stars and the galaxy, boosted that saturation a bit. And exponential transformation is a way of doing a little bit of background brightening without having to use curves. And that's about where I stopped at that point. So I'm sure I missed some stuff. I'm certainly much better in a scripted tutorial than I am live, but I hope I did okay there. I hope I brought at least a little bit of insight into what I'm doing now, rather than showing anything revolutionary. Again, before I forget, and we can have some questions, I think, if we've got time, make sure you watch the primer of part 1 and 2. Go to ipfrapey.com/offer.html, okay? And this will get everybody on this Hangout. Apparently, Mr. Pete didn't change the date for me. Let me refresh. But we're going to, there it is, it's my bad. We're going to honor this till the end of the month, 3/31. You can get half off on any of the PixInsight Part 1, 2, or 3 streaming content, or on DVD. And we'd love to have you take advantage of those. I think it's going to cut the learning curve way down, just as Harry had opened the door and opened the eyes of so many of us. These are really slick, really scripted. Did them with Rogelio Bernal Andreo, and I think we really did a real masterwork on these, and defined a lot of stuff, kind of put them in the one place. Lots of research, and I think you'll really benefit from them. 2017 is supposed to find a book on Springer Press called Inside PixInsight by myself, and I need to get cracking on that soon, but this will be for those who really value books, either in conjunction with video or separate and apart. This should be hopefully the first major documentation, practical documentation. Again, I'm not the math guy. I'm not going to go into the depths of the algorithms with you, but what I'm going to do is talk to people like myself who want to make beautiful images and how to do that in a practical sense. So with that, I'll shut up, I think, and see if anybody might have any questions.
Yeah, I do want to remind people in Q&A that you can ask your questions, type them right in, and we'll ask them right out there. I see Alex has a post in Q&A. I didn't even know we could post in Q&A. I wish I knew that earlier.
I didn't know we could do it either until I opened up a second computer and signed on in a second account and figured out how to do it.
Your secret account.
Yeah. So I've got two instances of this running. Warren, that was I really appreciate seeing everything except for that one interruption from somebody up north in California who threw you right off your track. So thank you very much for doing that. Folks, remember, if you've got any content questions, you can ask them in Q&A on the YouTube feed, and you can put them in the comment section if you happen to be on the live or any other way you can do it. Warren, your set of chronological new process icons. You mentioned that they're very good because they're chronological and they remind your 50-plus brain about what you're supposed to be doing. But what you forgot to tell people, I think, is that it uses a different set of defaults than the defaults that are already assigned in the program itself. Can you explain how you derived your defaults?
Yes, so you're right. I don't think I really ever connected A to Z. So let me do this real quick, is open, I'm going over to my this is top secret stuff, no looking. my production folders where I actually burn the DVDs from. And so what we give you is these guys. And notice, oh, that's not supposed to be true. All right, I'll have to look at that. I'm sorry. But yes, what you're doing is, you beside creating these pretty little icons and creating shortcuts to the processes that you use the most, and in addition to putting them in chronological order, as you develop, as you mature as a processor, you start finding settings, and I did mention this at one point, you might find settings that for your particular setup seem to work pretty darn well. Now, Juan talks about fast food, right? And it's very difficult to get one image to play like any other image, even when it's from the same system sometimes. But that being said, there is a commonality that you start developing in settings that you like. And what you're doing then is every time you've refined them some, as I showed briefly, you can drag this over to here, and it'll say, do you want to replace TGV denoise? Yes. And as long as you then remember to save those icons, and again, you can call them whatever you want and make as many sets as you want, when you reload them, these will not be program defaults. These will not be the last settings used. They will be your individual preferences. And so I can't give you those, but I can give you an icon set with a good starting point. And so I tried to do that.
Yeah, we've actually, I don't know if it was Alex that had his PixInsight screen open at one point, but we noticed all the process icons on there and commented and found out they came with your videos and DVDs, and that seems like a pretty good selling point, because for people that are unfamiliar with PixInsight, jumping into those tools is probably the most intimidating factor. It is a toolbox, but each tool is intimidating in itself.
Right, right. Yeah, it's been a lot of help, and of course I have a 24-inch screen, so if you open them and you don't see them, as a customer wrote recently, look for a scroll bar down at the bottom here, because it may just be that they're sitting over on the right edge there, and you need to drag them in or out a little bit and adjust them and save them as you want them. Now, you may have noticed I don't want to use the Freudian word, but I'm very persnickety and very meticulous, so these are all lined up just perfectly against the right edge, and my little workspace bar is dragged up against them. Everything is stacked all neat by category in the background, but your workspace might look like an atom bomb went off, and if that's what works for you, you need to feel comfortable doing exactly what works best for you.
Warren, have your new instance icons been updated, or do you update them on your website? I occasionally go back and have downloaded them again. And are they changing at all?
Yeah, they do change. I send Pete, the latest and greatest. And the reason I got a little flustered there is I seem to have made a little bit of a tragic mistake that I might need to speak to Pete about, because what I did recently was make not only had I updated them. Yeah, this one's got them. Okay, so you see the little red D's. So you can rename these processes anything you want. You can also put in descriptions. And so what I did for some of these was say, hey, MLTNR, multi-scale linear transform, linear noise reduction. So I'm giving you guys, clues as well. Recommended starter settings for TGV denoise nonlinear. And apparently I didn't replace my my PI1, but my PI2s have them, thank goodness. So I'll fix that up after the fact. But yeah, anytime I find something new, better, I update them. We don't announce that every time. Maybe we should. But yeah, it's a good idea if you're a streaming customer to see if they're changed. And if you're a DVD customer, say, hey, Warren, can you send me the latest and greatest of the icon sets?
Thank you, Warren. This isn't a sales kind of thing. None of these things on the AIC are that kind of thing, and I know Warren knows that. But these are really good tools. What I kept butting my head up against PixInsight and found that the defaults on the program when you just call it up they just weren't working. When I started using the chronological icons, I could much more easily get through an image processing, a session of image processing on a particular image. So if you can at all take advantage of those, for those of you listening out there, and it's just learning about PixInsight, they really do get you over a hump. And then once you're over that hump, you can start changing them around yourself. But at least you get over that hump. Now, in the meantime, we've had a question that I think might have been answered, but let's make sure that it gets asked again, right? If I were to call up the ABE or DBE here on your image or on your processing icons, and I were to change some of the parameters, and then go on with my life, and then the next time I call up your chronological set of icons, would I have my old, the one that you originally had, or would I have incorporated my changes? In other words, every time I close out the program, does it save any process icons?
Okay, so it automatically does not save process icons unless you happen to save them within a project. But short of that, you physically have to say, click on this icon or go to the process icons, save process icons, and you need to save them. So you could rename these Warren's chronological, Warren's alphabetical, and then when you start tweaking, save them as Alex's or just whatever you want, and then you'll always have my default to fall back on if something messes up. But again, as you refine them, you want to resave them for yourself.
What I've taken to doing is I have a skinnier monitor than yours, so when I load your process icons, they're actually off the screen, and I have to scroll over to grab them. So I rearranged them, like you said, we were allowed to do.
Yeah.
And then
drag them over.
Yeah.
Drag them over, and then resave them. Yep.
And then the first thing I do when they're all clean and nice and neat like that, I actually added a few more because there are certain icons that you don't like with image integration and stuff like that I found I just changed them for other purposes. At any rate, and so I just substituted my set, and then I saved that whole thing as a project, even though there's no data in it, and I call it my template. And so when I want to start a new set of data, I call up the project template, do my work, and save my project under a different name from that point on. So that way I get around having to rearrange your icons each time.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's great.
It looks like, oh, I'm sorry, it looks like Pete, who I'll assume is the Pete that Warren was referring to, is in the stream, and he's saying we will do an update on the icons and email the subscribers this week. So it looks like that's happening. I'll assume that's what you're talking about. John Talbot, it looks like you tried to ask a question, but it got cut off after Warren. So if you get it in, if you can ask the question again, you're welcome to. I noticed you're not using the default mask color.
Yeah, I really like that violet. That red is a little bit. I love my monitor. I don't get any kickback from Asus, but this Asus ProArt, which was their first foray into professional, photo processing monitor. The one shortcoming is even at its brightness offsetting, it's just borderline for me. And that red is a little intense for my eyes, and again, Mr. Persnickety, I've tried every one. I just really like the way that violet visualizes for me.
I noticed that. I'm wondering why I'm still using the red as the default, because I completely agree. I can't really see through the red. I always get confused when it's inverted and whatnot. So
right. So we have So let's put a mask on, and that's another thing I notice. I don't know about you guys. There's a selection in global preferences that says, and mask initially shown. That sometimes works, like here, where I apply it and it's shown, and it oftentimes doesn't initially work. But you can, again, Control K to visualize, and there's a lot of different things you can do to the mask rendering mode, not only colors but some other things here. And then in the global preferences, under default mask settings, you can actually choose that as a default and change it on the fly if you want. And remember to globally apply your preferences here.
Definitely.
And if anybody has any ideas, I just posted to the forum. And by the way, the forum is a great place to pose questions to, because you often get Juan or Vicente or Carlos or another P team member to answer questions, and sometimes not. But for this specific data, this luminance, the luminance from the Chile scope, I don't know what's going on, but when I apply a mask, and you guys saw it briefly before, I get this bizarre visualization. The color will not happen, and I can invert it, but that's the way it looks, and it's difficult, for me, as you said, Adam, with the red not working so well for you. It's difficult for me to see the masking. Now, one thing I did realize is, if you'll bear with me a seckie, is that you could use well, it didn't work that way either. So I take it back. No, it's really not working for this, and I don't know what it is. It's a PI created master. I don't know why it would be abnormal, but it pretty much does that on all my luminance. So any questions specific to projects or anything else I can help out with?
Excuse me.
Warren, how long did it take you to become fairly familiar with PixInsight? Describe your learning curve.
Oh, I felt over the, I always tell people, when people call me an expert or a guru, whether it's Photoshop or PixInsight, I tell people I'm a great documentarian. I'm not necessarily an expert, and as I've admitted to you guys, I am not, do not have a strong math base. So although I was able to expertly document PixInsight beginning in part 1, which I believe was 2012. Of course, I had Rogelio with me and a lot of research, but I would think by the first year, I was getting pretty comfortable. And as again with Photoshop, after a dozen years, still learning things. I'm still learning things now. Now, let me say this, though, if that sounds intimidating, what I often tell people is, as a teacher, as a documenter, I feel compelled to know the 1, 2, 3, 4 different alternate methods that you need to or you can accomplish something with. You, as users, only need to have one nice way that works for you. You're not trying to impress anybody. You don't have to spend endless hours of experimentation between ACDNR, TGV denoise. You can either take my word for what I say is the best, or take the forum's word. But again, there's a different compulsion there as a teacher to feel like I need to know a lot of different ways, whereas as a user, I'd be perfectly comfortable getting a formula that works great. Now, and that being said, formula and recipe, those are dangerous words. Again, Juan uses that fast food line, and I like that. And I typically talk about recipes and spice cabinets and knowing what the spices are and what they do and how much to use. because, again, even the same data from the same systems just tend not to play the same. You can't use those carved in stone settings, and that's why the dreaded Harry word experimentation we all have to at some point embrace and become comfortable with.
Warren, there's a couple of comments over in Q&A. One of them is
Okay.
from a John Talbot. Was that? I'm sorry, now I've lost it. About that there's an easier way to get play with Windows pull-down menu in PixInsight, and it would rearrange my icons better, and that should be noted for everybody who's watching. And the other is from was it Bill? It was a comment. Bill McLaughlin's commenting that as he's organizing icons and image and process dialogues, that PI does not allow him to place these on the upper and lower monitors, but does with right and left. And as a result, he can only use 2 of the 4 monitors, which seems like a waste. I haven't been into the Windows part. Like you said, once you learn how to use what you learn, you don't need to go back and do the other things sometimes. Are you familiar with the Windows option in there, the window option, and how it can rearrange things? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm not
Maybe
sure I know what.
problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know what John's talking about.
Across the top.
I'll butt in here real quick and tell you what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is if you have a monitor arrangement where you've got upper and lower monitors as opposed to right and left monitors, or maybe some combination of both, you can't, in PixInsight, unlike every other program I've ever seen, I'm unable to float any of the dialog boxes or windows onto the upper monitors. It will go right-left.
Right. Gotcha. Hey, that's something for the forum, you know, wish list. There's a separate category. You certainly can drag these right.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I actually did post that to the forum some time ago and never got an answer. That's why I was wondering if you might happen to know whether there was whether there was an answer to that.
No, and that's frustrating. That happens. Sometimes those questions just fall through the cracks, unfortunately. Yeah, and that's a good one. Yeah, I have a sub monitor. I don't use much with PixInsight, but if I did, I'd pull it off to the right, and I just didn't realize that.
Well, it's really great, especially like with histogram transformation, to be able to enlarge that, graph window, really, most of a whole monitor, because you have a little bit of control.
Right. Right. Is this John, by the way?
This is Bill McLaughlin.
Or is this Bill? Hey, Bill. Good to hear from you. Yeah, John Talbot, by the way, was one of the first guys out there, espousing the power of DBE, and he was one of the early guys that really began to sell me on PixInsight.
Great. Adam, you're reviewing the one stream and I'm reviewing the other stream. Warren, there's 2 sets of questions and comments that are made. I think we've covered all the ones that are related to Warren's stuff, haven't we, Adam?
Yeah, I agree. So if anyone does have any questions related, ask them now. But if you have anything unrelated, feel free to ask them as well.
Right.
Hey,
and
Warren, how come I can't?
We are going to make a few comments here about who gets invited, how they get invited, what the limits are inside the room, and all that other stuff. But that's about Google Plus, and stuff like that. It's not about Warren stuff.
I have a question for Warren.
Go ahead.
Warren, how come I can't save the Blink icon to the desktop in my process icons?
Really?
It won't let me drag it to the desktop to save it.
Huh. And I don't have.
Totally wrong.
I mean, I use Blink a lot, and you know what? Just looking at Blink, is this Mike?
Yeah.
Just looking at Blink, Mike, there's no new instance available, so it looks like, it's just not doable.
I mean, I've had to learn to use Blink to get rid of bad images, because it does such a great job of previewing them, and I just wanted to put it in that whole workspace you created for me, and
Right.
I couldn't do it.
I think that's because it has.
Doesn't it open up to the same thing that you had before? After you close it, doesn't it open up to whatever it was before?
It does. If you have a list of images, it'll bring up the same list again. But I think it doesn't have a new instance icon because it didn't actually apply to anything. If you have a new instance or a global apply, it's because it's going to be applied to data in some way, and the Blink doesn't do that.
And I mentioned earlier the process explorer, and so again, Mr. Minimalist doesn't have his open, but just know that let's see, the process, where is it? Well, here it is. It is open. It is open. So you've also got this submenu, and that's a little helpful too. You can also set your favorites here. So that's another way of getting a shortcut. It's not going to do what the new instance icons do for you over there on the right as far as your own settings, but you can certainly create your favorites and get to them quickly over here. I'm going to close that because I don't use it.
Question for Warren on your tutorials. Can't spit that out. Are you planning at some point to have, once there have accumulated enough new updates and processes to PixInsight, do you plan on doing another program or two to talk about its newest features, that sort of thing?
Pete and I, we had a little brainstorming session recently. One thing we've considered for a long time is going to a subscription type model, a lynda.com type of model, so that, if there's not enough saved up to actually commit to a whole series, to at least to be able to do updates where on a monthly basis you would get all of the content for one price. That would be one way to do it. I could certainly do an update, and I've already got a bunch of stuff collected from when we finished part 3 up that I would like to do. And another thing I'd really like to do is do object-oriented type lessons that we could provide perhaps the data, and whether we did that or not, just do an absolute walkthrough like we did tonight, but with obviously with more detail of step by step by step on a galaxy, on a glob, on a nebula, on a narrowband, that type of thing. So yeah, we're not done, but it's probably going to be a long time before we would see an actual PIP 4, PixInsight Part 4 series. But
well,
I thank you
you mentioned Lynda, and they specifically have one that I watch called The Practicing Photographer, where he goes into various topics on photography, but they're all over the map, but they're only very short, presentations, like one every few weeks, and that works quite well.
Right. That's great, yeah.
Warren,
Yep.
Since you've got nothing to do, and you and Peter, maybe you could sit down sometime and make up a clickable index, so that if I wanted to look at a particular topic, I'd know which of the tutorials to go to, right?
Yeah, we've talked about that. And something that I always do, if I can do this real quick, and I think it's worthwhile, and I'm sure most of you guys are Windows savvy enough to have figured it out, but let's say I'm deconvolution, and I say, well, darn it, deconvolution video. So at least if I have an idea which series it's from, and I call up the table of contents page, that's kind of a nice way of quick searching where things would be contained. We have thought about, Alex, and you and I have talked about it too before. I don't think we found the right engine, at least within our Business Catalyst, that's our host for the secure part of the business, to have a really good search engine, but it's definitely something we're thinking about.
One thing I've done, and I know it's a great deal of work, but it's really helped me, along with the old saying that you don't really know anything really well until you can teach somebody else how to do it.
Right.
Based on your tutorials, I actually have gone in, and as I process an image, I will make my own HTML tutorial in my own words, because I figure if I can explain it, then I actually understand it.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in that, and believe me, don't think that I don't resort to my own scripts, especially in calibration, because there's times I just need a quick reminder, and I'll call up my own scripts. And scripts are something, you know, even though they're embedded in the videos and you can do the closed captions and see them, you know, that's something we're always willing to provide somebody if you want a printed out text.
Warren, I have a kind of a question comment, and it was stimulated from you when you did the masked stretch, and I noticed the quality of the stars, just how good they looked, specifically the brighter ones, and
Right.
And then you combined that with pixel math with just I think a basic I don't know if it was like 70-30 or 50-50, and I always wonder if you were to go deeper into pixel math and set kind of a threshold with either an if-then statement, whether you could only bring that back into the brighter star areas. So,
Yeah, I've seen. I think you guys had David Alt do a presentation. Yes. I don't know what he had covered, but you know, guys like that, I mean, they speak math. And Gerald Weschelberger, if you can find his website, Austrian gentleman, you know, I wish I had that ability, because apparently, if you can write the equation, you can do a lot of amazing stuff with pixel math.
Yeah, we have David Alt in the room, and I was wondering, he might have a comment on that, because he'd probably know how to do it, but I think we'd have to see whether it worked.
Yeah, you can definitely do that, Adam, and it really just depends on how you want to select your range and everything, but you can definitely do a ranged apply, or even a graduated apply to, you know, what the intensity is, so that you only get the brighter stars or the peak of the stars, or you can use a combination star mask where you have just the brighter stars where you do the apply to it that way.
Yeah, because the stars really looked great, and they still do, but they really looked great. But it was only the few brighter stars.
Yeah,
important ones.
Be advised that sometimes mask stretch results look horrendous and not usable, and other times really nice. And you could use a full-out masked stretched chrominance with a traditionally stretched luminance, but sometimes you get some odd artifacts, again, in some of the brighter stars. And there are fix arounds, but again, if I'm going to use mask stretch, just for me and for the results I'm getting with this series of data, you know, if it looks good to itself, I'll use it seasoned to taste.
Thank you. We are already getting some thank yous from the outside of the board, so I'll say it again. Thank you. It was a great presentation. Guys out there, feel free to ask your questions, because we are going a little over time, but ask away before we run out of time.
Yeah. We do have one from John Talbot, Adam. It's Warren, when do you find it useful to use intensity transformation, color saturation? How do you know when to do that?
Oh, yeah, I love that, and I'm surprised if I didn't use it. And it's, you know, it's probably just the nature again of this galaxy, because there's not a lot of color variation, as we agreed. But I will do, as we saw, you know, a global saturation with a curve, either in the C or the S again, right? But what color saturation does, and again, that's detailed very nicely in the tutorials. This is not global. This is very selective, like some of the better Photoshop tools. And so what you can do here is, well, why don't I just link up here with a real-time preview. In fact, let me take that back. Let's create a preview so we can really see what's going on here. And do a real-time preview of the preview. So you can do global saturation, kind of like what you did with curves, by just dragging the line, right? But what's really cool about it is, okay, I really like what that's doing to my blue stars, but I don't like what it's doing to the ruddiness of the galaxy. So I can then, kind of like curve points, I can pull down my red range. I probably didn't need to do that. All right, let's start over again. So let's say I pull up my cool colors, my blues, and I start to like what that's doing to the blue stars, right? Let's see before and after, and it's a lot less red now. But if I want to really limit any red saturation, I might take it to about there. And about there, and maybe smooth out that curve a little bit. But yeah, I can then selectively decide what ranges of color, and I could actually notice the U, watch the little rainbow. I could actually reverse that with the same curve if I wanted to. I could be boosting and keeping the cool colors unsaturated, or return to normal and get the blue. So very powerful way to saturate, especially selectively. Make sense?
Thank you. I'm scanning Q&A to see if there's any new questions come in. Kind of hard to follow it. There's too many.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see, I just looked through Q&A, I don't see any new ones unless they pop up now.
Peter Proul posted his the link to the discount offer. Has that been adequately covered? A reminder on the 50% off link, http://wip4ap.com. Yeah, show them that again. I don't know if that came in. So one of the problems with having to monitor these questions and comments streams so that we know when to ask you questions is that we sometimes lose track of what they say.
wip4ap.com/offer.html, or drop us an email if you lose that, and we'll give all of our Google Hangout buddies 50% off on streams or DVDs.
And the link is in the description of this Hangout on our Google Plus page, so you can find it.
Thanks for that.
Warren, are you still giving them the process icon set?
Oh yeah, yep. We talked about that. No, absolutely, comes both on the streaming page for download with the DVD, and you know, with this updated version of some descriptions. Yep.
I'm going to vouch for that, because I had totally given up on PI until Warren made those for me with some basic settings on them. I mean, talk about making it much easier to navigate through that thing.
Well, that's much appreciated. It's I remember Wadowski saying, he wrote the book that taught most of us how to CCD image to explain it to himself, and this was a big part of making it easier for my mind to follow. And so I'm glad it's been as helpful as it has to a lot of people. That's great. Well, I've enjoyed it a lot. This was a blast, much more relaxed than I thought it might be for me. And because again, with all of those images in the background and windows and previews and everything, it could get really hairy. I wanted to kind of try to step through things without obviously going into every process. But I thought it went pretty well, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think it went very well. I learned a lot.
Great. Right. Awesome.
I definitely appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I do want to remind our viewers, next week is the Paramount Imaging Workflow by Richard Wright, so you'll get an idea of that. And it's about your last minute that you get to ask questions if you have them. And while you're asking those questions, I'll just go over what we're doing in Google. First of all, there may or may not be a bug going on that's preventing some people to get in without using the link that we've been sending. but we're limited to 10 people in the room. So if you're not getting in, we might be at that limit. But when we're not at that limit, we're going to share that link and get it out. For those of you who've been coming a long time, it should just be the same way as usual that you get in, but the Google bug may be preventing that, and I know they're trying to fix it, but until they fix it, that's just going to be the way it is. We can't complain because we're not paying. Well, I've been complaining, but I'm still not paying, so. And I want to remind you all that you could get some hot equipment from Mike Miller. A nice Paramount Me.
And an RC, nice RCOS system, and a ATEC attic. Was it a 4,000, Warren?
11,000.
Oh, 11,000.
Yeah.
I'm taking low bid offers.
Yeah. The prices get better every week.
Mike's a good man. Mike's been a great friend. We were observing buddies at New Mexico Skies, and he's a great guy.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all out there in the stream for coming. We're going to end it up, but hope to see you next week. So thank you all, and again, see you next week.